Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to Scott for joining us. I guess I'll give a little introduction for those of you who don't know Scott. Today we're going to be talking about his book, Honest Advent.
Well, we all got it there.
Yeah. Scott Erikson is an artist, author, performance speaker, and creative curate who mixes autobiography, mythology, and aesthetics to create art and moments that speak to our deepest experiences. Since we're in the season of Advent, our book club has been reading his book, Honest Advent, Awakening to the Wonder of God with Us, Then, Here, and Now. Scott, like I said, we're so happy to have you here with us today, and we're looking forward to all that this conversation has in store for us. So is there anything else you'd like to, as we get started, to share about yourself with the folks in our meeting and our listeners?
Share about myself.
Yeah. That might be relevant to Honest Advent.
Oh, no, perfect. Well, I feel very humbled and honored to have have made this book possible. My joke is I'm not a woman, but I'm married to one, and I've witnessed 3 pregnancies and births up close. And I was recently on a podcast with a friend, and she was like, "What books were you reading that helped inform writing this book?" And my response was, my wife's biology. That was the book I was reading. I just was watching the embodiment of this, you could say a revelation, you're going to have a baby, and seeing how that honestly comes into the world. And it's a mix of wonder and joy, and also pain, and a lot of heartburn, a lot of fluids. And so it was just, so I feel like I'm just honored to have been a witness to that, and I am a parent, so I participate in it. But my heart was really just trying is always to find Jesus in our midst, to find the living God working amidst the absurdity and ridiculousness of existence. And I'm really I'm humbled and honored, but I'm also just really glad I took the time in the years to kind of put my attention to this. So it's great to be here discussing it with you after so many years of kind of contemplating all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you say about the goopiness and the grittiness, and that need to talk about embodiment. And I would love for you to say more about how you understand this, the incarnation of Jesus, and the humanity and divinity of Jesus in that as well.
That's a great question. This is in the book. I learned this Russian literary term called astronomy. And astronomy is the art of making that which is familiar unfamiliar again. So the community and the faith community I grew up in was very, I don't know. I think we portrayed Jesus in how we would imagine it to be. I know there are better offerings now visually, but when I was growing up, it was like the 1977 version of Jesus of Nazareth, and it's this blonde guy who's always just no emotion. I think they were he's probably how do I act this role? And they're don't show emotion. That's the best way to play it. So Jesus just always seemed a little, robotic and stuff. And I spent a lot of time as a visual artist thinking about how images affect us. And what's really fascinating to me is when you're a kid, if you grew up in church, you're given cartoons, you're given illustrations of Jesus all the way up until middle school. And then imagery stops, at least in Protestantism. And it stops. And we never substitute those childlike images for more gritty, robust, whatever whatever we've experienced by the end of our innocence and we entered into the intensity and complexity of adulthood, we aren't given imagery for that. And so we still have these like Sunday school cartoons trying to bring those into our present complexity, and it doesn't work, or it feels false or not enough, whatever. So it's really helped me to look, I don't know where everybody's coming from and stuff like that, but it's really helped me to understand that Jesus was fully human and fully God, and that's the mystery that's ununderstandable. But often the community or the faith communities I grew up in just dismissed humanity. They just went fully God. And like, of course he was able to do that because he was God. But I learned that there's a whole other train of thought, which is just like, Jesus was fully God, but he put away all that supernatural business to be fully human. So what you're witnessing is some kind of human and being filled with the power and spirit of God. So that's our invitation, is to enter into that too. And so I have spent a lot of time just thinking about, there's still many things I don't understand and things I'm like, I don't know if I can be that way in the world, but it's there to start the conversation and stuff. And so I'm always trying to like confront the cliche about what I think Jesus is doing in the situation, what it sounds like. I try to use imaginative prayer a lot, which is like an ancient practice, but I think actually like the Spirit really meets us there. Imaginative prayer is simply like to read a passage of scripture and then spend time imagining yourself in that story and asking God to meet you in that story and like seeing it from all angles and stuff. And that's become really powerful for me. In fact, I probably used a lot of that in imagining these stories and these situations, what it felt like, what it sounded like, what it smelled like. I don't know, those kinds of things. Because I think what I'm interested in is that from my own experience is, why do we dismiss ourselves from divine happenings? What is our interior conversation? What is when people are like, well, that's Jesus and he can do that, but I can't do that, or that's those people from the Bible, or that's not going to happen in my life. I'm curious for my own sake, why I say that to myself and why others do, and get into that. And I think it's a lot of this is because as we've given reverence to things, and artistically, as we've depicted these stories and we cleaned it up a little bit and we put some gold leaf behind their heads and stuff, we removed these characters from being messy humans like we are. And so we removed our context from these ancient contexts. And I'm only interested in reading the Bible if it's a story that's still happening today. If it's a story that just happened back then, that's fine, great history. But I'm curious if it's still happening today. And I think the reason all faith traditions, especially the one that I grew up in and partake in still, the reason we keep telling and keep telling these old stories is because they're still happening today. And so we can see these women and men partaking in these like interesting circumstances, and it can reflect the presence of God in our lives right now. And that's what keeps bringing me back to it.
Wow. I love what you're saying about imaginative prayer. Is that what you called it?
Imaginative prayer. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to be a camp chaplain at a camp in rural North Carolina. And sometimes with my campers, I would have them act out Bible stories. I would just tell the story and then have them like take on characters and just be in it. And it was so cool because I don't know how much, like, I'm hoping that, by putting themselves in the story, they're internalizing them and like really understanding them by getting into the stories. But it was actually really helpful to me in preaching different texts. So I was in seminary at the time, and I would sometimes, if I was like wrestling with a text to preach on in my preaching class, I would have my campers act it out. And it really brought it to life for me and helped me get into it. But I wonder what you said something about, us not wanting to think about the humanity of Jesus, and also at the same time us ironically like cleaning up our our stories we tell about, you know, the Bible and about Jesus. I'm sure those are connected, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how those might be connected.
Yeah. So, when you said that about I have a big bookshelf here, but they're all turned backwards. But there's a book called The Celtic Way of Evangelism. I know it's somewhere like right here. It's really it's about St. Patrick and his crew that went to Ireland, and it's really fascinating because the way they did evangelism was to like honor God already in the midst of the Celts. They didn't come in and be like, you need to know our God. They're like, God's already here, like the Shamrock. But one of the ways they taught people how to pray is they did imaginative prayer. They just said, imagine Jesus and the disciples are in your garden and they're having a conversation. Just what are they talking about? Enter into that conversation. It's great. Your question was, can you say it one more time, Claire? It was like about the humanity, why we don't want to spend time with the humanity of Jesus.
Yeah, and at the same time, so like for example, I like talking a lot about the humanity of Jesus, but oftentimes I would get accused of not recognizing the divinity of Jesus enough.
Yes.
And it's like, of course I think Jesus is divine, but like we don't talk about it enough. Why do you think we're so scared of that?
I mean, obviously this isn't a scientific assessment. Like we haven't taken a large group of people and done questionnaire. So maybe this is my own bit and my own experience and talking with others. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. And I also like I really am uncomfortable with the brand of Christianity. And what I mean by that is like the symbols, the way people talk, even in the like more like liberal progressive stuff that I've been in. Like I remember going to this like conference in New Mexico and it was great, but every single speaker got up and they'd be like, let's just God, spirit. And I was like, is the only way to experiencing God is through a lisp? Is that the only way we can have like a moment with the Holy Spirit? Because every single speaker, it just got, ooh. I was like, there's no shouting. I mean, I guess there's like a whole other group of religion that does shouting. But my belief is that there's nothing you can do to separate yourself from God, from the love of God. When we talk about the voice of God, we're talking about the voice of love. So there's nothing that we can do to separate us from that. But our shame allows us to think that there is. So most of our conversations about God are really conversations about our shame and about how we think we earn love. Now, none of us here would really go, love is unconditional from God. We don't have to learn love, except a lot of us spent time in traditions where we talked about this is what you do and this is what you don't do. A lot of time on this is what you don't do. And this is what you do and this is what you don't do runs on the narrative that love is on some kind of earning scale and can be demoted, right? And then, I've been really good. Let's take some steps back. That is a scale of earning love. That is not what God's love is. God's love is already given. It's already grace. It's already transformational. What it's trying to do is poke into all the guards we've put up to deal with protecting us from our shame, the narratives we tell ourselves. Look, I'm not a therapist. I go to therapy. I too am on the journey. I'm not saying this from a place of like, look at me, I figured it out. This is still this has been, I got to do something with this. This do and don't do got mixed in the concrete in my formative years. And it's very hard to get out once the concrete is solid and has dried. It might be something that I constantly struggle with my whole life. But all I can do is to counteract that is spend time with love, spend time with grace, and allow my experience to get larger than the experience I had with like earning love and failing. That is the only way I know how to outweigh that is through more experience and transformational experience. to answer your question in a way is I think often our conversations about God or Jesus are just really our projections of the things we're afraid of or the things we hope for. It wasn't until I was 30, Claire, 39, that I realized that the voice of shame and the voice of God were not the same voice, because I thought they were the same voice my whole life. And then I'd spent enough time with the voice of God, and I was like, oh, that is not the voice. Well, the voice of shame is not the voice of God. That is my own projection of what I thought God was saying to me. And God was gracious enough to allow me to take that long to figure that out. I don't know, like the other thing too is I grew up learning that faith was something that was up to me. And now that I'm 45 and I'm a trained spiritual director, I went through spiritual formation school and spiritual direction training. And what really solidified for me was that faith is really something that we do. Faith is something that happens to us. It's not something we do to ourselves. We do spiritual practices, like Jesus said about the parable of the sower. We're not the sower. We're not the planting the seeds. What spiritual practices are, keeping our soil tilled so we can receive what God wants to give us. We're not in charge of planting seeds. We're in charge of keeping ourselves open. That's what we're in charge of. But spirituality, the journey with God, is to allow God and to trust God that God is doing what God wants to do with you. You can see this in all the metaphors. Birth, death, resurrection. These are all things we're not in charge of. We're not in charge of being born. We're not in charge of dying. We're not in charge of being reborn. In fact, when Jesus's metaphor about being born again, people took that and being like, are you born again? As if it was something you're in charge of. There's another way to take that whole passage where he's talking to Nicodemus and he's like, Nicodemus, you must be born again. The must be there, we often translate it as like, you have to be or you're out. But actually, you can take that word and go, Nicodemus, it's already happening to you. You must be being born again. You're here at night. Something's already happening to you. It's Jesus is the author and perfecter as our faith, as the scripture writer says. And so I am trying to now I feel really lost on answering your question. I think that's the real move, is like, often our conversations can be about trying to control and manage our shame and how we're in and out, versus when you talk to somebody who's really like, I trust that God is leading me where I need to go. When you stumble upon those people, you're like, tell me what it is that you're talking about. I want to know what that is. Anyways, so that's some of my scattered impressions and thoughts about it all.
No, that's beautiful. And what a realization. Thank you for sharing that. I think Dana has a question.
I have so many questions. Okay, because there was so much there. There's so much to unpack. But yeah. First, I want to just go back and hear what I hear from you is that you've been on this journey, this transformation, and how. I think there's kind of two questions here. I want to say they're connected, but they could not be. How did that journey progress for you over time? And then you talked about kind of the progressive Christian movement, and almost where. So is the pendulum way far over here on kind of the fundamentalist side, and then there's the way far other side of the progressive Christian movement where it's like, where do we sit now? Does it come back to a middle? And this again is your thoughts, your opinions, your ideas. Yeah. But that was a very interesting statement, especially because we're a progressive Christian movement. And so I'm trying to figure out where all of this sits.
Yeah. When I say like progressive liberal, I was at a Richard Rohr, like a Center for Action and Contemplation event in New Mexico with like 1,000 other people.
Yep.
And I was like, I can't imagine a more like progressive situation. But in the midst of that, I was like, oh, there's definitely like a vibe, like there's definitely like a brand to even this. It's interesting. It was, Yeah. So that's what I meant.
Is there a brand to that's what I'm wondering. Like, is there a brand? Can Christianity get out of a brand? And what does that even look like?
I think people, yes and no. For me, it's what gives me endless joy is to just be like, everything's invented. The way we do church service and stuff, it's all made up. But why we keep doing similar things is because from the beginning of time, when somebody stands up and shares their story, it does something to us. When people partake in like singing together, it's transformative. When somebody shares their story and there's like an opportunity to release our shame, that's transformative. And when we pool our gifts together, money, but also like talents and time and stuff, and help others with it, that's transformational. So these are in all the fabric of any kind of transformational experience. And that's why like our services or our ceremonies are always similar, because these things are always been transformational. But we don't have to do it any certain way, and so that's what I mean. It's like it's all invented, but there's kind of a tendency to lean towards these certain things because we find these to be transformational. And when you start to see that, you're like, oh, that's what's happening at Moth storytelling events, and that's what's happening at concerts and comedy halls. And, you see very similar things happening. For me, what happened is, I guess, I didn't like a, I don't know, when we talk about deconstruction, it's very broad. For me, what happened is I had enough friends die at young ages. By my mid 30s, I was just like, I think I was just after one of the last funerals. I just was like, man, whatever is after this, I'm not in charge of. Like, I just was like, and how I get there, I'm not in charge of that either. And then I reflected and I was like, so much of the religion I grew up in was obsessed with afterlife. Oh, when is the end times? When is Jesus going to get back? What's heaven going to be like? And I was like, I wonder if it's because it feels very insecure about this life, about how any of this applies to living now. And what I started to understand about my own life is that I was like, the spiritual practices or the way that I do this faith is starting to fail me. And so I started looking around to what help. And then me, like a lot of other people, I came across Franciscan practices through Father Richard Rohr. I simply heard him in an interview, and he said the statement. He said, Franciscanism is summed up like this: the doorway, the doorway to the spiritual world is through the physical world, and the spiritual world is much, much larger. And what he was saying is like, there's a much larger reality, which is what I grew up in. There's, this is just just flickers on a wall compared to what's really there. But there's no way to access that except through this reality. And so what that helped me, instead of a lot of the rhetoric, which was kind of a disembodiment, can't wait till we're here, let's let it all burn, which then I think you get older and you're like, well, yeah, but this idea makes us like pollute the earth, and it's really destructive to other people. And you're like, I don't know if this is what being a faithful person means. What this practices and way of thinking about was like, if God wanted us to be in heaven, then God would have never made the earth. Like, this is where an infinite, unknowable mystery wants to meet a finite creation. And this is what we must say yes to. This is what God has asked us to say yes to. Whatever is after this is what we have to say yes to. And this is what Jesus partook in and is inviting us to find God here. And so that's what really shifted for me. And then to really find the holiness, find the godliness, find the presence in the mundane and sloppy and saturated. I live in the Northwest. It's very moist. It's very moist here, in the wetness and mossiness of the Northwest. And so that has continually been my invitation, is to find God in the midst of all of this. Even when there's long bouts of like, I don't know if I have eyes to see. So that's what really shifted for me. So then what's the brand of that? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's certain communities that practice that well. Maybe they're driven by leaders or groups. we're at an interesting time when we've commodified faith into music and bookstores and artwork and stuff. And so sometimes it's like I remember my wife, she put on, this is a while ago, she would never do this now, but she put on like some, worship music in the house. And I was just like, it's not that I don't like this music. It's just like, I don't even listen to music that sounds like this. And to say that I'm not a Christian because I don't like this type of music is ridiculous, but this is what Christian music is. And that's what I mean, like a brand, which is just like, you don't have to like Christian music. You don't have to like Christian books. You don't have to like Christian sermons. What does that even mean? Like, to be a Christian doesn't mean you like Christian products. Like, that's not what that means. That's not what that means. I would say to be a Christian means you believe you don't have to earn love, and you let the love of God transform you and see that and pour that out into the world that you live in. That's what I would say it means. Products and music and soundtracks are adjacent to that. They can be great. I have many friends who make Christian music, who make Christian stuff. I would even be somebody who people say, you make Christian art, which is never something I've said about myself. I just can't get away from it. So how's that to answer your question, Dan?
That's great. That's great.
Is that good?
That's great.
Okay, great.
Does anyone else have, now that we've opened the floor, I'm wondering if anyone else has questions they'd like to ask.
Yeah. You have a question, Chelsea. You're muted.
I have a question. My question is, the images in Honest Advent some of them are graphic. Yeah. And I'm wondering if there was any one particular image that you were like, should I put this out there? Am I really gonna? Yeah,
we had to take out 2 nipples on, there was 5 nipples originally, and now there's only 3. I had to remove 2 nipples.
We have to go find the other ones.
Well, there's this one, which is like this is 1 nipple. And I think there's, the second one. No, you don't see any nipples in that one. Just, awesome. There was nipples in this one, but these are the 2 we took out. I think they're in, it's in the very end of the breastfeeding one. They're very unclear. They're just like little. There we go. It was, I'll just say, as as a man attempting to portray female biology in a respectful, non-sexual, objectifying way. It demanded a lot of humility. It just is like, I can't believe I'm doing this. But I really was, I just had this conversation on the internet about this one because now my wife had bra and underwear on, but this is literally a scene I saw my wife wait. She woke up one morning and she's just like, oh, my back hurts so bad. She just had the worst night's sleep, and she's just sitting on the side of the bed, just And I was like, wow, that's a really good image. Just that stuck with me. I was just like, here's this. In order to bring this thing forth, it's really costing this woman something. And just I could see it. I just alongside her in the pain. Then eventually the waddle, and then the 3rd trimester sitting up in bed with heartburn. I just witnessed this physicality to it all. So why naked? Well, for one, they didn't have modern bra and panties like they did back then. Also, I just am not interested in making work with shawls and stuff. I don't know. I just whatever. So I went to art school. I got into art school because of my nude drawings. The president, he's like, these are great drawings. We'll bring you in. So I'm fine with it. I didn't want it to be erotic. I wanted to, but like boobs grow for some people during pregnancies. And I think there's like, you can see the tummy line and just trying to like, it's just trying to show like this kind of fleshiness of it. And this, like, it's in this body, it's happening in this body. And it's amazing to me is like, most people are fine with it. It's really like certain kind of rules that we really haven't talked about, which is like, hey, we don't portray these things this way, which I completely reject. That for me, that's like what I'm pushing on. I'm just like, nobody came up with those rules. It's all our cultural or shame rules that came up with these rules. So I'm just kind of pushing on all that. I wanted to make something that didn't look anything like Christmas, that just was like its own thing, that allowed, that gave honor to what is asked of the female biology in order to make this process happen. And so that was and I was like, surely a woman should be doing this. Maybe even her name is Shirley, but I just was like, I could have taken this idea and like tapped like another female illustrator I know and been like, you should do this. Maybe I should have done that. But I also think that like the majority of images have been created by men, and I wanted to be a man who counteracted the majority of images that made this like safe and sanitary and almost like belittling or keeping aside the female experience. And so I just was like, well, I'm being asked to do this, so I'll just do it and we'll see what happens. So yeah, that's a bit where it came from and how it's gone.
And were you nervous to like put that out into the world, or were you like how are you feeling when you like went to go release this?
Yeah, no, legitimately, one publisher was just like, why is this white man making a bunch of images of pregnant ladies? Like, that was like one of their responses. And I was like, that's a great question. And I really had to own why I was. And it was like, well, this was my experience as a witness. This is my skill set. And this is also my offering to a sea of maybe beautiful but maybe unhelpful narratives, and why not? So I just, at some point, you just have to go, hey, I don't know, I'm the one doing this, and I'm sorry, I'm not as like, I don't look like what we hoped the person was making it. Look, I'm not here at all to bemoan being a heterosexual white guy right now. Like, not at all. But, it's not everybody's favorite. I don't know. There's just like, I can't help my incarnation either. So either I just have to like sit on the sidelines or just be like, here you go. I hope this helps. And I'll actually always, I just like, I don't have a lot of competition. I'm also in a category that nobody kind of cares about. So I'm always like, I'm always hoping that if I can do anything is spur other people to pick up this kind of mantle of contextualizing these stories into our modern aesthetics. And if I can just be like one person that helps encourage a generation of other designers and artists and stuff like that, that's awesome to me. So that's what I'm trying to do. But I am a contrarian sometimes, and I'm also willing to just like, let's push on this for a bit. I've done some Stations of the Cross stuff, and when I look at all that stuff, it's some of it's, like, oh, that's uncomfortable, but the content of that is about a murder and it's all very safe. And so I started making images that felt very aggressive or hard or a little like punk rock, because I was like, we're talking about a murder here. Like, why are we keeping this safe and lispy? This is like an excruciating moment. This is awful. And we should have art that kind of looks like that. So that's kind of my context. I'll give one more filter into my process as well. And I've learned this over time, is that I imagine that I'm going to maintain a relationship with the community that I'm presenting this to. Sometimes artists can be like, it's my vision and it's whatever I want. If you don't like it, I'm out of here, and when I do my work, I imagine like, what would it be like to present this to my spouse, who I still have to be married to? So if you're gonna push on something, you have to be willing to continue the conversation, is how I think about it. There's a lot of artists who are like, just whatever, it's what I want, I don't care. But I'm like, meaning like, I'm sticking with the church. If I'm going to push the church, well, I'm going to stay in the relationship. So I got to think about how I want to push somebody I love versus like just telling a stranger how they've got it wrong and they need to look at my stuff. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Like having a relational idea, like I'm going to see you soon, kind of keeps me in that, like, what's the best way to kind of lead us from a place to another place? Because I'm not trying to like make anybody like mad. I'm just trying to like the conversation I had, a woman emailed me about this, and this happens every year. And she's just like, I wouldn't like being portrayed that way. And I often take things to private conversations and don't let people know about it. But I was just like, I've thought this through. I'm very intentional on how I'm trying to push the audience with this, because that whole meditation is just like, what happens when we make things sacred, when we give reverence to things, is we're trying to honor something that happened, which is great. But what we do is we begin to separate ourselves from that story. And we can immediately go, that happened to them, but it would never happen to me. Whereas the whole thing is about, look who it's happening to. It's happening to the people you wouldn't expect. And it's happening in their bodies. And we live in I know that you women know what it's like to live in a culture that has certain ideas about your body. And you'd be surprised that men feel that way too. We might not always talk about it. We all kind of live in a culture that has a lot to say about our bodies. And maybe it's been the help from my friend Hillary McBride, who's a doctor, therapist up in Canada. She has a book called The Work of My Body. No, man, what a bad plug. What a bad friend. It's up here somewhere. Anyway, she's really helped me a lot with like entering into a spirituality that allows my body to be a conduit for that. And that, so yeah, there we go. I feel like I answered your question.
I was going to say, it sounds what you were saying about like being attached to the community that you're like sharing your art with, that it reminds me of like preaching. Yeah. Like when I am preparing a sermon, I'm thinking about the people that I'm going to be preaching to and with, and it is a conversation. Like when I say amen and give a benediction, even after I give the benediction, like people are going to email me and be unhappy with it. Yeah. People are going to come up to me after and say, and have their own ideas, whether they're like, they learned something or they're just saying good job. But I hope it's a conversation. Yeah. And I'm not just going to give a sermon with no context to whoever's out there.
Yeah. And I wasn't, I think that's right on. And for this book, I wasn't like, when you pitch a book to a publisher, you have to really think through all the stuff. But, I was just like, I wasn't trying to be like, how raunchy can we make these Bible stories? Like that wasn't how much nudity can we get in here? That wasn't the goal. The goal was just like, how much do we need to portray the human body to help us understand this thing? Because I don't know if you studied art history and stuff. A lot of paintings of baby Jesus, he's like a full grown man. he's like a little baby man. And if you've ever seen a baby come out, they're like this, and they're like gray, and they're like, they're ugly. They're very ugly when they come out. And no, I've never seen one painting of like, I've come to take away the sins of the world. Like it's not that. But that is like the kind of paradox of it. It's like, I'm going to come in the same way you did, ugly and crying. Ugly cry. There's a good post. That's another Advent follow-up. Ugly cry.
So while we're talking
Christ, I'm actually going to write that down. Ugly
while
cry.
We're talking about.
That's a great Advent post.
I can't wait to read it. While we're talking about like community and audience, I'm curious, as you were writing and preparing Honest Advent, who were you thinking about? Who were you really writing this to and for?
Well, it was an Instagram baby. I posted a few 2016 and had, it was the biggest response, like they're like, this was your biggest post this year. And it was the Mary and Eve and my thoughts on that. And then the next year Advent came and I was like, oh, I should try to do more of that. And and then the next year I did it. And then after like 3 years, I was like, oh, I have 20 posts. So it was really like, what's great about Instagram or social media is it can be a place to test ideas, like, oh, does this land with people? These are just some thoughts. And that's what really, so it was like a tested thing, kind of like, oh, people are hungry for this kind of meditation and stuff. And it gave me a chance to like, when certain people, if they did like it, I might go to their DMs and be like, can you tell me why you like this? But I just had an overwhelming, what was overwhelming to me as a guy was just that, like, how many women felt seen and honored by them. There was very few. I mean, there's only like 1 or 2 people who are like, I don't know if I like this, but it was like overwhelmingly women were like, this is what it's really like. Thank you for showing what it's really like. And I don't know. I like women and I want to be a fan. I don't know. I was just like, oh, if I can help if I can help make something that's very honoring to the female experience, I should spend time doing that. So, yeah. Especially being, having been aware, I grew up in a tradition that didn't have any women pastors, things like that. And yet we had family friends who were female pastors and stuff. And I at some point I was just like, I want to make sure how can I support this as best as I can? So that it was some of that too in this work.
Well, we have time for a couple more questions if anyone has any questions or things they'd like to share.
I'm looking at the questions you sent me.
Did anything stand out to you, or?
I mean, is there anything you wish you would have included or left out? Does anybody have a question though? Like, I don't have to answer that. Chelsea, you want me to answer that one? Okay. I talked about this with my friend Emily. I wish I would have worded the intro a bit better, because in the introduction, I talk about deciding to refer to God with a non-gendered pronoun, although I don't say that, because that right now people would be like, I'm instantly mad. Why? I don't know. I was told to be mad. Meaning like God is, like Jesus is a he, but God is, all things have come from God. So God is a they, if we would best want to portray God, God is a they. So I refer to God often as it or they. And if there's any like negative comments, like in Amazon or things like that, it's always about this. And it's part of this like larger BS fighting for my perspective kind of thing. And for me, it was a lack of humility, or sorry, not a lack of, it was an act of humility. Like Meister Eckhart says, God, rid me of God. When we feel like, oh, I know what God's like, you don't know what God's like. God is an endlessly knowable mystery. And part of the journey of God is to unknow what you've known, not hold on to like truths. Like we can know God is loving kindness and that kind of stuff. But like, there's a reason why, I don't know, God's invisible, so we don't know what that is. And it's much more immense than we could ever possibly imagine or think about. So for me, I find a lot of like the arguments about, well, God's a father and we can only refer to God as a man, is more about controlling the narrative versus being transformed by the reality of God. And so for me, it was just an act of like, I'm trying to keep the mystery transformative. And some people just see it as like, he's just in this camp of, I don't know. I'm like, that's the dumbest reason. That's not what I was trying to do. But I wish I would have maybe spent a couple more sentences describing that. I don't think I did well enough to curb some of that. And that's fine if haters going to hate. But I feel a little like mad that I get dismissed that easily on that, because for me it was like an act of worship. It wasn't like I just want to go against this heteronormative narrative. It wasn't that at all. It was really just like, what are we talking about? Like, because if we're talking about something incarnating, we're talking about something that's like completely, like, we can't understand incarnating to a somewhat understandable form. And that is like wonder making and mysterious. And that's kind of what the meditation of incarnation is about. Yeah.
Man. So this is a twofold question, but I guess it leads into my next question. Okay. Is there an Honest Advent 2.0?
Yeah. I don't know if there's 25. I made a new one this year about Zach. Let's just say Zach. And like the one he's like, how can this happen? Because I'm old, and then he can't talk until John's born. I've had that meditation since last year, but I actually made an image and a meditation on it. And I have a couple more about like, because when you like about Mary going to see Elizabeth, because when you have an angel story and you find out somebody else has an angel story, you want to talk to them. And definitely the ugly cry one now. That's a great one. Like, because I think we've all hit ugly cry, and that's a part about being human, is the weepiness of it. So I don't know, it could just be like an appendix edition or something like that, maybe some follow-ups. So I don't know if it's a book, but I'll definitely, there's still things that keep interesting me about the story. That's the other thing too, is that it's really like 5 chapters in the whole Bible that is about this. It's not like a lot of content. So it's just kind of like sticking with it and just seeing what comes up. I'm always, my job as an artist that I've come to understand is just going, what wants to come through. And so my job mostly is to just keep tilling that soil and be open. And then I'm always like, what do you want? Is there anything you want me to talk about or put my attention to or listen to? And so I'm just kind of taking cues in that way. So I don't know if it'll happen or not, but I'll probably do the ugly cry. The fruit of this conversation is a post called Ugly Cry. I think it's so good. For one, I'm a big fan of crying. I have this picture right here of when I met sadness at Disneyland that I have right here on my wall. And so, and I think there's my favorite. I'll say this sometimes where it's just like, I'm a Christian because of the resurrection. I am. But I'm a Christian mostly because of the shortest verse in the Bible, which is Jesus wept. Because if there was a story, this is what the post is. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm writing notes. Because if there was a story about God and he ended up crying at his friend's funeral, like I have, like you probably have, then I wouldn't believe it. Because I would have been like, no, you just insulated yourself from the whole awful experience about losing your friends. But because that's in there, I'm like, it might be true. So, and there's a funny parallel about like how babies come out and they cry. And the first thing they do, and they look ugly. And at your friend's funeral, you're probably ugly crying. So there's a good concept there.
That's so real.
yeah. That's the gift. That's the gift of this Enneagram 4. I'm going to bring you the sad content.
I was going to say, don't get started on the Enneagram.
I'm gonna bring the sad content to Christianity because because 7s have kept it for too long on the positive praise trip. We don't.
Man. Anyways. Well, Scott, this has been great. I'm wondering, is there anything you're working on right now that you can share with us? Yeah. I know you're working on this ugly cry idea, but any projects that are on the horizon?
Well, friends, I know if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see stuff that I've been posting, and there's some new stuff, but mostly I've just been kind of recycling things because I felt really burned out at the end of spring. My oldest son went through a number of complicated surgeries on his eye. We discerned that we should move back to this place. We had to move. This, you can't tell, but I'm just in like a really cold garage right now that I kind of try to spice up. And I haven't really had like a space, but and what was happening, and it's only in retrospect you can kind of see what the Spirit's been doing with you, but like actually I'll tell you this story. I was talking to a friend of mine who is 2 years out of a divorce. He's dating again. It's complicated. Kind of doesn't know what to do next. And we were on the phone. He's just like, I just don't feel like I have it together. And I was like, man, I feel that way too. But I feel like we're down on ourselves by that phrase, I don't have it together. Because what is having it together? And I was like, I think we need like a helpful picture of what not having it together could look like. And I was like, what about this? Imagine like a dinner table and it's all set out and people are eating together and then somebody spills their water. What happens then? Well, everybody lifts their plates up and then you take care of the spill and then you put it all back down and you continue. What if not having it together is just taking care of the spill? It's ridiculous to think that we could go throughout our lives without some kind of bumbling or stumbling, and we would never deal with the thing that's underneath what we're trying to set up. If togetherness is setting the table, then like every now and then we have to like lift up our plates and clean up the spill. And you'd be surprised when God leads you to wilderness places, to desert places to deal with that spill. And I went through the last 6 months have been really hard, like, I don't know, hard. And if I could sum it up, I said, whatever God is leading me into, the preparation for that was dealing with my spill. And so today I go get my keys to my new studio space, which is like down the street, 6 minutes from here. The muse is back. I have a couple book ideas, I have a ton, like so many things. I'm like, I don't even know how to do any of this stuff. And I've had some people come alongside me and give me some really good suggestions about how to move forward. So I'm coming out of that. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting things happening for me, but it all goes so much slower than you want it to. So this morning a kid threw up, so I'm like washing dishes, and then I gotta go get this thing, and then I gotta pick up my daughter from school, and I gotta drop my other son off at math tutoring, and then I gotta get this guy who's gonna take the carpet out of my studio, and then I gotta go to a dinner club tonight, which is really fun. But you know, it's just that's the things of life. But yeah, a few little things, probably a book of prayers for depression, prayers for the season of depression. And I'll do that again with my friend Justin McRoberts, who I did the prayer books with. And I'm working on a new show. I don't know if you've ever seen my Say Yes show or any of my shows, but I'm working on a new show that is about paradox. And the running title is Pedestrian Paradox. Because I'm not a university professor. I want to talk about paradox for how we experience in our everyday lives. And maybe that's a helpful framework. Well, Christ is a paradox. So it's more about like, you know, there's this kind of like moving from binary thinking to, you know, building, deconstruction, rebuilding, this whole thing. But it's like, I want to explore what's really helped me as I've gotten older is just to go, sometimes their life is just two opposing truths, and where our life is living in the midst of it. And so wanting to give artistically and comedically and creatively and spiritually and honestly, like maybe a model or an image of what maybe paradox is what it means to be a person of faith. That it's not one or the other, but maybe it is just like having that spectrum of like, I believe, I don't believe. I want to praise you. I want to curse you on the same walk, like, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's actually what it means to be whole. Oh gosh, I can't believe I just said that out loud. I have said this for years, and it's just like, I don't think the goal of our spirituality or our Christianity is to be a better person. I think the goal is to be a whole person. Because that's what it means to move and enter into the light. It's let everything be seen and realize that nothing has been able to keep in the dark. It's all been in the light. And God knew that when God said, I love you. Nothing is surprising to God. So anyways, that's the stuff.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to see that. And so something we ask all of the guests on our podcast and our book clubs, what is your hope for the church, or what gives you hope for the church?
That's your last question? Dang, that's
where we normally leave it.
I was having drinks with a friend, and he was like, I'm still surprised you're in Christianity. And I was like, let me break it down for you. I was like, for one, a Christ-centered worldview really hasn't failed me. I've had to get a lot broader on what that means, but it hasn't failed me. And I was like, but two, we definitely live in a time where the institution that we grew up with that gave us a lot of great things has also proved to be a harbor for sexists and racists and narcissists and abusers. And that institution has protected those versus trying to deal with it. And it's broken our hearts. I think if we're paying attention, we're all in the midst of a bit of heartbreak. And this is part of my paradox conversation. But then on the other side of that, I keep bumping into people who tell me their mystical stories. I keep bumping into people who tell me about a God at work in their lives. And I keep seeing transformation happen. What am I supposed to do with both of those? So my hope for the church is just like, hopefully what we do is to go, we're not here to save institutions. We need to address our fascination and our love of power, but we also need to see that God's working in our midst, and that's happening too. And so we're going to gather whether we like it or not. So we should really begin the conversation of, how do we want to gather? Human beings have always gathered, evolutionary, anthropologically. We're going to gather whether we like it or not. So how is it that we want to gather? Maybe we're given a chance to kind of reassess that. That's my hope right now.
Well, thank you. That's a beautiful vision. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you, Scott. I hope everybody has
Thanks, Chelsea and Dana and Randa and Katie and Raya and Chris. Is it Raya? Did I get it right? Oh, okay. Close enough. Great. Raya. You said Raya.
Right.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
I just want to thank you for writing this book, because I feel like it really like humanized and realized Advent for me and helped me really connect it to like my present day life and stuff like that. So I felt very connected to this book and really enjoyed it. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I'm so humbled and honored by that. Thanks. That's great. Thank you. Making me blush right at the end. All right. All right, everybody. I hope someday we move from screens to real dreams, and we'll see you out there. Okay. Yeah.